This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. Healthcare professionals can lead their careers with LinkedIn. Discover jobs by specialty, preferred shifts, and even desired salary. From mental health therapists to radiology technicians, it's now faster and easier for healthcare professionals to find the right fit. Learn more at linkedin.com/healthcare. Side effects may include faster job placement, improved work-life balance, and increased career satisfaction.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
This is Let the Record Show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is my good friend, esteemed colleague, Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the state vice chair of the party, as well as the county chair of Suffolk County. Well, as we sit down to do the show together, Mr. Chairman, guess what we have? We finally have a Speaker of the House of Representatives again, Mike Johnson of Louisiana, who's on number 4 person, as I understand it, in the leadership of the Republicans in the House of Representatives. I think this is a very big deal, but I want to get your thoughts on this.
Well, I do think it's a big deal. And on political speaking, this little nightmare that the Republican Party was having is finally over. And I think that the most important thing is the House of Representatives will finally get back to business and move forward. But, you know, Your Honor, the forefathers of our great nation foresaw that, as we discussed in previous shows, the needs for checks and balances, not to really base everything on trust, but to do things in a democratic way, democratic way, small d, for the republic. And, you know, democracy is sometimes a little messy. And that's what we saw. So after 22 days of some wrangling and such, the House of Representatives has a Speaker of the House who is a bit of a fresh face, even though he is more in the lower echelon of the leadership of this party. I believe that's what the advantage is here. I believe that there are a number of moderates, conservatives that wanted to maybe have a little bit of a clean break from the leadership tree that was existing. You know, Mike Johnson has been a member of the House of Representatives since 2016. He's from Shreveport, Indiana. He's a son, the oldest son of 4, of a firefighter who passed right before his election due to cancer. And I think what he said in his opening remarks a few days ago is telling. He said to the American people and to his colleagues in the House, the challenge before us is great. The time for action is now. And that should be and is the mantra of the House of Representatives, and it is the mantra of the Republican Party. It's the time for action is now. In his remarks, he said that inaction is unacceptable, that he was immediately going to be speaking and moving forward on a package of aid for Israel. And he mentioned a broken border that needs to be addressed so that we can stop the flow of fentanyl, terrorists, unvetted migrants, from what he's viewed from Texas and Arizona, even mentioning New York. He acknowledged that interest rates are at a record high and that relief needs to be there. And we do that by cutting spending and reducing inflation. And what I really, truly embraced was that he referred to our national debt as our greatest threat. This House is going to get back to business. It's going to get back to business almost immediately. It took 22 days. It was messy. It was ugly. I know the Republican base has been frustrated, but I believe that this is the time is now. We brought the right man at the right job. Mike Johnson even said that in Scripture, you know, it is our Creator, our God, that, you know, raises leaders, whether they be those elected in the House of Representatives, those in our police departments, our fire departments, our hospitals, our schools, anywhere in our neighborhoods. But this is where I believe God finally has said, we need this leader to take us forward.
Well, I have to tell you, I was, you know, remember, as I always say, I'm the House Democrat, you're the House Republican. But you know what I believe? I believe in a two-party system. I believe in checks and balances. I believe in separation of powers. I believe in countervailing forces. I don't believe in one-party dominance of government, whether it's the city, the state, or or the federal government. I think it's unhealthy. You have majority tyranny, which, as you know, was warned by our founding fathers in the Federalist Papers. And the Federalist Papers explained the Constitution. And it was all about rejecting and controlling majority tyranny and a respect for the rights of individuals and giving people the opportunity to flourish and to grow, and not to have public policy dictated by one ideology. And what happened against Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker, and I'll always call him Mr. Speaker, but with Speaker McCarthy was absolutely awful. It was shameless on the part of that gang of crazy eights to do that to him. He was an excellent speaker. He acted responsibly. He brought the party to victory in the last congressional elections. If it wasn't for Kevin McCarthy, you never would have had a majority of Republicans controlling the House. And he was a fundraiser. He was an organizer. He helped pick out candidates. But the fact of the matter is, if it wasn't for Kevin McCarthy and having the Republicans control the House, Jesse, you never would have known the truth about the Biden influence peddling scandals. You wouldn't have learned about the corruption in the highest levels of government, whether in the intelligence community or corruption by some FBI operatives. We're now learning, and stuff is coming out because of this, we're now learning about plants by Iran in both the in the State Department and the Defense Department. So that's why two-party systems are so important, Jesse. And we lost that for the last 3 weeks because of these crazy eight. They're totally irresponsible. There was no basis for that. He was governing with a slight majority, one House against a Democratic Senate and a Democratic White House. They raised the debt ceiling, which they needed to do. They went forward and did a continuing resolution so the government could be funded and we could take care of our responsibilities. And now we're in a time of crisis, and we'll be talking to Colonel Schaefer about this when he comes on in our next segment. We're in a time of crisis where we need national unity, vision, hard work to protect and defend this great country. And you couldn't do what had to be done, Jesse, while you had a Republican Party that was stymied. How many different candidates came to the surface after they destroyed Kevin McCarthy? You had Scalise, and then you had Jordan, and then you had Emmer. They had three people, all notable representatives, all high-quality people, and they blew each and every one of them out. And that's because that ridiculous rule that one person can bring a motion to vacate, and that treacherous, narcissistic, empty-headed character out of Florida, Matt Gaetz, destroyed the ability to have a two-party system. What say you?
I do agree. I believe that these crazy eights did a disservice. It was done for personal reasons. We do know that there's a personal animosity between Matt Gaetz and Speaker McCarthy. And then I know in previous shows we discussed that, Hakeem Jeffries and the Democrats should have stood up for the House as an institution. As a political leader, I think that Republicans needed to take care of their own business. I will be the first to say it was too messy. Ones that confused our base and confused the electorate because they saw for the first time ever in a very long time, red on red battles. We've seen that dysfunction historically on the Democratic side, but for the last 22 days, unfortunately, in Washington, D.C., which is symptomatic of this, we saw the dysfunction. But this is what we've always said, that democracy is a little messy. And there is a diversity amongst the philosophies and ideology within the Republican caucus. We do not speak with one. We do not speak as automatons that, like Pelosi used to run her caucus, where it does not matter about the country, it does not matter about institutions. We have free-thinking individuals. Do I always agree with those those thought processes and their actions? Absolutely not. I believe this in the House of Representatives was a case study for any and all Republican and Democrat majorities in our chambers, whether they be in the state legislature, our city councils, our village boards, or our county legislature, that you need to set aside your philosophical, personal differences for the better of the whole, for the better of the caucus, and in that way, the better of the electorate.
And you know what I found particularly reprehensible, Jesse, is I turned on the television over the weekend, and there's Matt Gaetz clowning around, showing off. He loves being the center of attention. And they asked him, do you have any regrets, any apologies for putting this country and the Republican Party in chaos? And he said, absolutely not. He would do it all over again. I mean, how awful is that? There's no maturity in that kid. There's no sense of responsibility in that kid. He's there. He's carrying on. He uses this as a fundraising gimmick to build up his brand because he thinks he's going to be a candidate for the governorship in Florida after DeSantis is term limited. And I think that's awful.
It is awful. And you know what? Perhaps maybe he appealed to a segment of the electorate, whether it be Florida, the United States, anywhere. But certainly anybody that cares for responsible government and does not care or does not look upon the politics of personal destruction and personal profiteering, they will reject the individuals like Matt Gaetz. His district, the voters there, if they see that Matt Gaetz is the one that they should represent him, God bless them, that's their choice. That's what this republic was built on, the choice of voters. Now, the choice is Mike Johnson of Louisiana, from Shreveport, the son of a firefighter. Now it's on him to lead this caucus, lead this House, to put America first. And I don't say that for any type of gimmick, because for too long, Democrats have apologized for America. Democrats have said America is less than, and Democrats on all levels have said that American exceptionalism does not exist. I disagree with that. And the majority, the loud, great majority of Americans, New Yorkers, and Suffolk County residents agree. The best days of America are ahead. The best days of Suffolk County and New York are ahead. But it takes all of us.
Well, I think it's very well said, Jesse. We're going to be taking a break. This is Let the Record Show with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Please stay with us. We'll be back in a moment. And we're trying to hook up with Colonel Tony Shaffer, an expert on foreign policy, national security, intelligence operations. And we'll be back in just a few moments.
If you're having problems with your septic system and you're tired of spending so much money each year to have it pumped, then SeptiClean is the answer for you. SeptiClean is an advanced, specially formulated blend of bacteria used in the treatment of home and commercial septic systems. The breakdown of waste in your system relies on biological activity of naturally occurring bacteria. SeptiClean restores the natural biological process in your septic system and boosts the existing biological activity. SeptiClean is completely safe on all plumbing and can help prevent expensive emergencies in pumping. SeptiClean has approximately 6 to 100 times the bacteria count of other leading off-the-shelf brands in a 1-year supply. SeptiClean comes in a water-soluble pack, which you flush down the toilet once a month with no mess or stress. Save time, money, and maintenance on your septic system. Find SeptiClean at Emporium True Value Hardware on Main Street in Sag Harbor, or visit micro-tab.com. That's micro-tabb.com. micro-tabb.com.
Fellas, you know Degree Cool Rush deodorant, right? Well, last year they changed the formula, and guys were mad about it. One dude even started a petition. So guess what? Degree heard us, admitted they messed up, and brought the original Cool Rush scent back exactly how it was. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So grab some and remember why its cool, crisp, and fresh scent made it the #1 men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory for all of us.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Not everyone is careful with your personal information, which might explain why there's a victim of identity theft every 5 seconds in the US. Fortunately, there's LifeLock. LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats to your identity. If your identity is stolen, a US-based restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year by visiting lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
This episode is brought to you by SelectQuote. Life insurance can have a huge impact on our family's future. With SelectQuote, getting covered with the right policy for you is simple and affordable. SelectQuote's licensed insurance agents will tailor your experience to find a life insurance policy for your needs in as little as 15 minutes. And SelectQuote partners with carriers that provide policies for many conditions. SelectQuote. They shop, you save. Go to selectquote.com/SpotifyPod today to get started.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
This is Let the Record Show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is my good friend and esteemed colleague, Chairman Jesse Garcia, Republican Party. And once again, we're honored and privileged to have one of the great American patriots, Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, worldwide recognized, nationally recognized as one of the great strategic thinkers of foreign policy, national security, and in the intelligence community. Tony served as the president of the London Center, as well as Project Sentinel. He's on radio and television all the time, and I'm always honored to have Tony with us. So, Tony, October 7th, 2023, I think is a turning point in the world. It was an attack against Israel by barbarians, by savages. They just came across a note in one of the terrorist pockets where it was handwritten, and it said that the strategy was to behead people, to cut out their hearts, cut out their livers. This was not a military operation. This was an act of terror. I think the world has changed, and I think it's changed for the worse. And I think we're in very dangerous times. And I want to get your thoughts on dangerous times versus serious opportunities, all these entangling alliances and strategy. So take it where you want to go.
So it's very clear, Judge, that the issues that are with us now are not going to be easily resolved. And there's a couple of reasons why we're here. First, there's been serial failures of the Biden administration to do those things necessary to keep the world kind of in a proper and positive direction. And I'll suffice to say that the Biden administration, their focus is to not lose. Now, that may seem simple, but it is the ramifications are what we're seeing. When you don't want to lose, that means you don't actually have a strategy to win. And that's why you've seen in the current situation of Hamas this duality of messaging. One day Joe Biden is for the Israelis, wanting to give them all the support, and next thing you know, he's saying, well, they have to be restrained, and we need to consider a two-state solution. That's not helpful. It's not actually going to help resolve the situation, and it simply muddles the water and creates opportunities for our enemies to take advantage of this lack of clarity. And to your point, the moral clarity here is immensely clear. The 7th of October showed that you are dealing with savages. There's no other way to put it. Those who conducted the attacks, the vicious and sustained attacks against innocent civilians in the kibbutzes in Israel, with no regard to human life, and then taking hostages, which we're still dealing with, was meant to be a completely horrific act, bar none. Now, at this point, because of the Biden White House giving room to Hamas, giving a voice to Hamas, you actually see the West negotiating with Hamas to get folks back. We've already volunteered and already spent $100 million to help Hamas in humanitarian aid. It's all these things we're doing essentially that do not actually promote the resolution of the terror. As a matter of fact, it's just promoting it. It's just keeping it going. It's like having a surgeon who basically is operating but refuses to actually use sutures to close the wound. The wound stays open because he refuses to do those things necessary to end the surgery. And the surgery in this case, Richard, is going to have to be removing by military force Hamas from any leadership position within the Gaza Strip. And it's going to be difficult, but that's something we should just focus on as a policy point.
Jesse.
Colonel, it's great to have you here. As we've seen, how would you rate the American response, the Biden administration's response to Iran and the Israeli war in the Gaza? Because for me, it seemed like a mixed bag. I mean, the judge and I, over the last several weeks, we gave the administration kudos for supporting Israel and sending the carriers into and sharing military force in the Middle East to support Israel. But then his address to the nation seemed to be more apologetic, more appeasement than anything else. So, number one, how would you rate the Biden administration? Where is this muddled message? What does it do on the international stage with our allies or those, Israel is going to have to depend upon to fight back these terrorists, because that's what happened. These are terrorists that inflicted harm, death on the people of Israel.
So you point out aptly the issues relating to the policy failure. It's a policy failure because there's no policy. You've got folks like Tony Blinken who are just completely out of their element. Tony Blinken was lectured to by President al-Sisi, rightfully so, I might add, for basically being an amateur. You've got Jake Sullivan, who I don't think could lead a high school debating team, let alone be the brainstem that has to facilitate policy guidance to all of the elements of the U.S. government, especially the Pentagon. While you have a lieutenant general, a Marine Corps type, in Israel helping advise the Israeli military on how to go about conducting an effective offensive into Gaza, you've got him negotiating, John Kirby said, or negotiating with Hamas behind the scenes. So, as I said, when you're playing to not lose, you're going to lose. And the losers in this case are the Israelis, because they do have clear purpose and justification to take military action and to be very severe about it. And yet, instead of jumping on, you have literally Joe Biden talking out of both sides of his mouth for purposes of what he believes to be a political neutral position to basically not lose. So, let me be very clear on this. When you're trying not to lose, you're inevitably not going to win. And by not winning, putting sides by both sides, and that's what's happening here.
Well, let me. I had the privilege today with our mutual friend Eric Levine to have a lunch group with Mike Duran of the Hudson Institute, who is on the National Security Council and who's an Assistant Secretary of Defense, who's one of your good friends and colleagues, Colonel. And he said the big problem, and I think Jesse and I have been talking about this, and also with you on other occasions you've been on the show. The big problem is we don't understand the game that's being played. If you work on the assumption that this is all about the so-called occupied territories, by the way, they're not occupied, okay? But they're not. They haven't been occupied in forever. When Sharon gave it up, I guess in 2005, they could have done anything they wanted with it. All they had to do was stop building tunnels and sending missiles across and building up the facilities. And the Israelis were giving them food and water and heat and electricity and everything they needed. They take their pipes and they made munitions out of it and rockets. I mean, that's very nice. So everybody complained about the blockade between Egypt and Israel to blockade. Well, you had a blockade because they made themselves a terror state. So give me a break about the occupation. But the real point is, this is never, in my humble opinion, correct me, Colonel, if you disagree, this has never really been about that. Hamas are just proxies for Iran. This is a much larger, most dangerous game. This is all about the ambitions of Iran, and they're the player, and everybody else are the puppets. What do you say?
So you rightfully outline, Judge, a form that is larger behind the scenes pushing all of this. And yeah, I feel terrible in some ways for the people of in the West Bank and in Gaza, because they are essentially pawns in a much larger game. Iran, China, Russia are all larger players driving this. I mean, look, Hamas would not be anywhere near as effective and prolific as they are in their acts of terror if not for the Iranians, not for the funding, if not for the direct support. I mean, they do build their own rockets out of pipes, but beyond that, they actually get material and financial support from Iran. And you've got Hezbollah as a sister organization, which is very much committed to the same set of goals of destroying Israel and all Israelis, literally genocide if they got their way. And I think this is where we have to recognize that. Oslo II, signed on the White House lawn, I believe it was 94, under President Clinton, essentially established a de facto two-party state. The Palestinians had the potential to grow their society, both commercially as well as economically, into something that could be a partner with the Israelis. And instead of partnering and working to understand and abandon the hate of the past, they chose to actually double down, triple down on saying that their job is to destroy Israel and the Israelis. That's it. And I'm just going to say it because it's true. The Nazis had set out a series of policies which was designed to literally eradicate the Jewish folks from the face of the earth. Hamas, for better or for worse, has picked up that torch and continued it because that's what they state as their objective. And I'm sorry, you cannot live, you cannot have a rattlesnake by your bedside who's going to bite you every time you turn around simply because you exist. And that's what they're doing here. And I feel for the people of Israel, Israel, because they are the ones who have to deal with this. I'm sorry, Judge. If West Virginia decided to start lobbing rockets into Virginia simply because they don't like the Virginians, we would permit Virginia to go into West Virginia and do something about it. And the fact that right now we're actually holding back our allies. I hear there's conditions being tied to certain weapon systems. All these things that should be pro forma, we give them what they need, like we did in '73, is becoming something of a political game that the Biden administration, again, is trying to use to benefit Hamas and slow the process down of justice, which the Israelis have every right to do.
Jesse.
Colonel, what is the significance? We see other players playing. I actually have two questions. Number one, what you said about Secretary Blinken, I completely agree with you. On Wednesday, he spoke somewhere and he said that if Iran or their forces hurts or injures or takes action against any one of our U.S. servicemen, that they would be dealt with swift and decisive action. Now, we do know that at least about 22 or 12 or 22, I'm not really sure, U.S. servicemen in about various camps throughout the Middle East region have been injured, wounded, attacked by Iran-backed militia. So that's number one. Number two, what is also now another, the other player is getting into this threat now. More overtly, China sending its a portion of its naval fleet. I forget which portion of its naval fleet it's sending, but about 5 warships heading towards the Mediterranean as well to join those 2 carrier groups from the United States. First, what implications does that have? And is this like the first overt actions by China in their involvement in this conflict?
So the Chinese with the Russians have been doing joint exercises with the Iranians for a while. So this is not new.
Yes.
But they have been prompting and preparing for this moment. And, yeah, as much as anything, you're going to see a fleet show up to be prepared to counter ours. That's one of the reasons I think they're going to put the Eisenhower carrier battle group in the Red Sea, not in the Mediterranean, to maximize our options. And the other issue, look, Jesse, the Iranians have gone back from the beginning of the war on terror from 2001 and been trying to facilitate actions against us. My book, Operation Dark Heart, I believe was partially part of the reasons that the Pentagon censored is because of the Barack Obama White House, because we interrogated and broke an IRGC Iranian operative in 2003 who was actually funding the insurgency against us. Well, that was going big time against the policy in 2010 and 11 when I wrote my book about the fact that the Obama administration's policy was to warm up and embrace Tehran. So I've seen personally the effects of Tehran, of IRGC, of Iranian shenanigans against U.S. forces. They've actually done that. And, of course, in Iraq, they actually helped arm, equip, and direct militia, Shia militia against us to kill Americans. So now Blinken saying this is, again, an absurd kabuki dance. We know this. And yet they are holding back the Pentagon from acting. I know, based on my experience, that the Pentagon has a number of plans ready to go. At any given time, within an hour, we could sink the entire Iranian Navy, the entire Navy. And I think that would be the signal to send. It's like, you continue to do this, here's one consequence. We're just going to do it. There goes your Navy in one day. But we won't do that because nobody in this administration wants to win. They don't want to push back. I would almost say they're addicted to the drama of chaos because they continue to take actions which do not diminish the potential for an expanded war.
I have to take a slight different angle on that, Colonel. I think they're addicted to reconstituting the balance of power in the Middle East, and it comes out of Barack Obama and John Kerry. And they wanted to diminish the balance of power where Israel was an essential player for the United States and the Pax Americana across the world. And they put all their chips that they somehow could play a game with Iran. And notwithstanding all the empirical evidence to the contrary that Iran were much better poker players and we were much shrewder, we gave them money, we gave them passes. If you look at the original Iran deal, that should have been a treaty, gentlemen.
Right.
That should never have gotten through. It should have been a treaty. It was an illegal act by the President of the United States at the time, Obama. Okay, that's number one. Number two, when they gave them all that money, they did not give it to them in dollars, if you recall, Colonel. They gave it to them in other currencies because it's a federal law that you can't give dollars that way. So they gave it in other currencies. And it was in billions, I don't know, 60 billion, 100 billion, I forget what the number was. But what did they do with that? They said, well, they'll use it to rebuild Iran. What they did is they went and built up the terror network with our money.
Right.
The deal never constituted a deal to stop the development of nuclear weapons by Iran. It just gave them breathing room to do it. It never stopped the production of military arsenals like missiles, and it didn't stop them from funding terrorists. So it was a stupid, ridiculous, asinine deal from the very beginning. Barack Obama sold it to America with Kerry. And by the way, Jack New, who is now the nominee by this administration to be the ambassador to Israel, was one of the guys who went out there to the Israelis and sold them on this deal. So that's the guy that you want to put in as the ambassador to Israel in these dangerous times? What's wrong with us?
So to your point, Judge, I don't disagree with your perspective. I think it's informed and well thought. The problem is, to your point, to add to what you said, the Biden administration just quietly let lapse the prohibition of the Iranians to develop ballistic missiles. That is to say that UN resolution prohibiting them expired quietly, and they wanted it to expire quietly. So now the Iranians can openly start working on ballistic missiles again. And regarding the funding, one of the things that's been underreported, as a matter of fact, virtually not reported, is the fact that there was no diminution in research in the nuclear program for the Iranians. They simply outsourced to the North Koreans. There's a partnership between UN and the mullahs to actually continue to develop nuclear weapons that will be used by Iran. They're just doing it in North Korea. That's what the money's for. So we are essentially funding a hardened path for the Iranians to establish effective ballistic nuclear missiles that would be used against Israel and our partners in the Middle East. And again, to your point, this administration seems completely open to that possibility. And the last thing we want is a Middle East arms race, which I think is what's going to happen once the Iranians have a usable nuclear weapon system that the Saudis are aware of.
Well, I think that's exactly right. We have to take a break. We'll be back in just a few moments. This is Let the Record Show. Our guest is Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, noted expert on foreign policy, national security, and intelligence community, a great American patriot. With us is my great co-host, Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Stay tuned for more important conversation in just a few moments.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
We're back. This is Let the Record Show with Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, our great guest, expert on national security, intelligence, foreign policy. Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. Tony, I want to ask you about this. I'm very, very concerned. There's a lot of blame to go around. You could talk about the blame about the intelligence community, both in the United States and Israel, not picking up this attack. But we're here now, and the question is, what do we do? What do the Israelis do? What does the United States do? What do our partners do? So there's been this request and I would say is probably closer to a demand by the U.S. government to stay the hand of Israel right now, to not move into, a ground action, to stay the hand, stay in the north, not go to the south. And the extensible explanation is they want to make sure that all the supplies and equipment go to Israel and to our bases across the Middle East, and all kinds of defensive systems come in. That's the extensible reason. I want to get your thoughts on that. Related to that is I'm very concerned, and I'm a big fan of the capacity of the IDF to fight and to protect Israel. And by the way, when they protect Israel, they're protecting U.S. interests. Right. But I'm very concerned about this tunnel operation. So what are your thoughts on those issues, Tony?
Well, let's start with the policy first, and I'll get to the tactics in a second. So regarding policy, Joe Biden showed his hand in his speech when he basically said he's going to propose this new funding bill where the split of funding goes 60% Ukraine, 40% to the Israelis. That's not acceptable. I think members of Congress have already said that's not acceptable. To commingle those two issues is not appropriate. Right now, the priority has to be the Israelis, period. And I think this is where, to your point, Judge, the Israelis have been an effective partner, a nation whose interests are very much in parallel with our interests as U.S. interests. Most nations act in their own interest, and we're not. We are not, as a nation, doing that right now because of this rebalancing, as you put it, that Barack Obama and others somehow believe that we should be doing. And it's not appropriate. It will simply lead to the ruin of the Israeli state, period. Many of us see that. And those of us who are informed, have studied this, who have been involved, recognize it, and yet nobody on our side has the political power to do something to stop them, and that's what's dangerous. So you roll that into the Israeli challenges internally. Yes, I've heard the same rumors that there's potentially a break between the government and the military. I think the military wants to do things a certain way, which they should. I would look back to the lessons of 1973. The Israeli military, faced with overwhelming forces and a surprise attack that they had to respond to, were able to recover amazingly. I think they're going to do the same thing here, left to their own devices. But you've got to give them the space and time to do that. You've got to let them figure it out. And then once the word is given, you need to let them be completely punitive. I know that does not sound well to those who are understand that their civilians are going to get in the way. But then again, on the 7th of October, civilians were butchered without regard to the fact that they were not combatants. So at this point, for better or for worse, I think the Washington Institute has actually said 57% of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip support Hamas. Well, that's a bad political choice. And as much as anything they're allowing for, they're being co-conspirators to the Hamas wrongdoing is something that we have to accept as fact. And we cannot we cannot sugarcoat that. I think that the Israeli ground forces could have already launched an offensive. I think there have been limited incursions based on things I've read and believe to be credible. I think they're trying to figure out a way to maximize the recovery of the hostages, as many as possible, before they go in on a full offensive. But with that said, there's going to have to come a point in time when they decide they've done everything they can to rescue hostages, and it's time to start knocking out the tunnels and knocking down Hamas basically across the board. I think that day is coming, and I think it's going to be soon.
How do you deal with the tunnels, Tony?
So there's two ways. First off, there's sophisticated surveillance systems that allow for you to kind of see them. I think a lot of the time when you see these buildings collapse is because the Israelis figured out there's a tunnel below them. And obviously, if you compromise the foundation, the building's going to fall in. So I think that's just brute force. Secondly, once the operations start, there's something called thermobaric weapons. Thermobaric weapons, they're the opposite of a flamethrower. Basically, they go in and they suck all the oxygen out of the air, and essentially they smother whatever's in the tunnel. And I think the fear is at this point, Hamas has put hostages in those tunnels. And that's why I think there's going to have to be a concerted special operations force, advanced force going in ahead of conventional combat forces, doing a reconnaissance of these things before they start going and destroying the tunnels. But there's literally hundreds of miles of tunnels. This is going to be something that's going to be difficult to do, but it can be done. But it's going to have to be block by block, acre by acre, and they're going to go through, and it's probably going to take the better part of a year to do it completely.
Jesse.
I completely agree. I do believe that, based on what you've just shared with me, what we've been reading, we have to let the Israeli military, decide when is the best time to move forward there. Because you say there are hundreds of hostages there. There's 22 still remaining hostages are unaccounted for Americans there. And if I'm not mistaken, Colonel, the United States, after the attacks on 9/11 and the Twin Towers, the Pentagon and such, we took that time to properly prepare our forces to move them around on the chessboard, so to speak, to ensure that the action we took was decisive. You've been in those rooms. Where is that nexus on political requirements of the elected officials in responding to the residents and the security of their nation, where it meets the practicality of military leaders?
You're always going to have.
How does that get resolved?
Yeah, you're always going to have what the military would call strategic dilemmas. If I do this, can I do this? If I do that, can I do that? I mean, there's trade-offs. And so a good commander, like my friend Joe Dunford, General Dunford, Fighting Joe, would lay him out very clearly. And I've heard tell that he was probably President Trump's favorite general because he was very, very clear on what options were and were not. Once you have an understanding of that, you have to have, and I'm just going to say it, political will to do what's necessary. Now, politicians often, Jesse, no offense to those on the phone, will act in their own self-interest. They will do things which they think will benefit their political future. And the military dilemmas and political future of individuals often do not mesh well. They just don't. So this is where you have to have a statesman who understands that he may be sacrificing a political future for purposes of trying to achieve great and important results, which may mean he sacrifices his career. That's where we're at right now. I think a number of folks on our side and on their side are very much worried about their legacy. And, Jesse, this is one of the situations where anybody who understands the situation has to set aside their political concerns about their legacy and focus on what's necessary to establish a global set of strategies which will result in stability. And that stability needs to be, as my judgment, the elimination of Hamas as an entity that has any ability, much like we did with ISIS back under President Trump, and establish a path forward that will eliminate the ability of the Iranian state to be a terrorist, the global leader in terror, as something that they've been doing for decades. These, I think, are legitimate. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hasn't Netanyahu demonstrated that in his past?
Netanyahu is right now, the people I speak to in Israel are not happy about his legacy. Many are blaming him for this failure. So that's one of those situations where, I've talked to, and I think you guys know him, Ambassador Ido, oh my goodness, he was the Consul General there in New York for a number of years, Ido Haroni. And I spoke to the ambassador. I actually had him on my radio show, and he talked in terms about the very thing you asked about. Because I asked him about the legacy. He's like, well, a lot of people right now are very much believe that Bibi Netanyahu was part of the problem. And now he has the opportunity to kind of pick up the ball and run with it if he so chooses. And that's a big decision he has to make for himself. Netanyahu has been the longest-serving prime minister in Israeli history. So he has an immense legacy, and a lot of folks right now believe it's going to end at this point, at least unless it's changed dramatically, with he being the guy who was asleep at the watch on the 7th of October. So, again, I think his best future would be to unleash the dogs of war, and let them go do what's necessary to eliminate Hamas. And we then have to look at the larger picture regarding Iran and Iranian proxies of what that means for the Middle East. Unfortunately, we have politicians on both sides, so including Netanyahu, who may see this through a political lens and may not be willing to make those hard political decisions which are necessary to achieve victory in the battlefield.
Well, Colonel Schaefer, Justin, I want to thank you very, very much for coming on. As always, you've been brilliant, insightful. You've educated us a great deal. I didn't know, frankly, having been in the merchant marine, but not the Marines, okay, that there was such a thing as a capacity to suck out the oxygen from those tunnels. Because what I don't want to see, and I'm not an armchair general and I'm not a hero with somebody else's lives, but I always think it's a mistake to wage a war when you're worried about the hostages. Of course, we're worried about the hostages, but that cannot dictate military tactics and strategies and what you have to do to win.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
And therefore, if you can suck out the oxygen, that's swell with me, because the more of those guys you take out, that's fine. Unfortunately, there's going to be collateral damage to some of those hostages because there are in the tunnels. But I don't think what you do is you allow Qatar, who you cannot trust, negotiate piecemeal, a couple of days here, a couple of days there, keep delaying it, because after a while you lose momentum on the part of the Israelis and the forces supporting them.
Absolutely.
So I want to thank you again, Jesse, and I deeply appreciate it. We'll have you back on as the situation develops. You're a great American. You're a great patriot. And Jesse and I are honored and privileged to have you had on the show today. Thank you.
Judge, I always appreciate our conversation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is Let the Record Show, using common sense. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Chairman Jesse Garcia.
This is Let the Record Show. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Jesse Garcia, Chairman of the Suffolk County Republican Party and Vice Chair of the State Republican Party. Jesse and I were very privileged to have Lieutenant Colonel Schaefer with us, a major expert on national security, intelligence, foreign policy. I want to shift gears. I'll tell you what I'm concerned about, Jesse, and then I want to turn this over to you. This is what I'm concerned about. As I always say, I'm for a two-party system. The Republicans, up until the time they went crazy and self-destructed, had a wonderful 3 committee chairs investigating the Biden corruption and foreign policy failures, national security failures, the failure at the border, and they've jeopardized that. But one of the keys, and you were part of this effort, Jesse, one of the keys to having a Republican majority in the House of Representatives was the victory of 11 Republican congresspeople. And without that, Kevin McCarthy never would have had his majority. And now they're trying to fix the courts. First, they fixed the legislative process with Gineris. They stopped a good judge from becoming chief judge. Somebody's just stepped aside because they recused themselves from the case. They appointed somebody who's connected to the Bronx political machine, which is controlled by Hastie. And I'm worried that they're trying to fix the results of the congressional elections for next year. There's a court case coming up in the middle of November. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Well, they are absolutely gerrymandering and influencing and basically suppressing the vote of New Yorkers throughout this great state as it comes to the congressional seats. We went through this process 2 years ago. It went through a litigation. The courts issued their ruling, and yet, again, the same Democrats, the same progressives that have tried to gerrymander the first time are coming back. But they're facing a lot of headwind now. A recent poll in the New York Post indicates that 72% of New York voters are rejecting this effort to gerrymander the district. 81% of them find this to be partisan, and overall, 62% disapprove of the action being taken. And 80% of those believe that it is a rejection or trying to circumvent the constitutional clause on redistricting. So what we have here is two realities. We have the reality of redistricting and its impact on the electorate, and we have the reality of what the issue is going to happen when this goes before voters. The reality is, when this goes before voters, the voters aren't going to be voting or may cast their vote on redistricting matters or gerrymandering. And that's wrong. It's unfortunate. But because the progressives have damaged the economy here, have made us less safe in New York, that the voters are going to be more interested in pocketbook issues like inflation, gas prices, home heating, energy prices, and the like. And, of course, making sure that cops have the ability to stop criminals, which the Democrats have stripped away. This is a battle right now in a very small chamber. It's really in the courts. And as you pointed out, the Democrats have done everything national, local, state, New York City, Democrats have done everything. They've placed their thumb on the scale, even more so. They've really just reshuffled everything so that the game has under new rules every time we come forward. This is bad for America. It's bad for New Yorkers, and it's bad for the voters and their families in each of these districts.
Well, the problem is that what happens if they're successful? They will have fixed the legislative system in New York, controlled by a supermajority of the Democrats, and the Democrat faction that controls it is a crazy left wing, the Democratic Socialists, and the Working Families Party. So that's number one. Number two, instead of getting an honest read of the state constitution and the obligations to abide by that, you now have a court that's been influenced and packed with a predisposition. The reason they stopped Judge LaSalle from becoming chief judge is that he was a scrupulously honest judge who was going to do whatever the law required. I have no knowledge of Judge Wilson, but he was pushed in by the wing that was hostile to the fair redistricting. Harrigan, who's the everybody said was a fine person, a fine judge, excellent lawyer, newest appointment. She recused herself, and what I'm concerned about, which is why I'm so upset about this, because I believe in a two-party system and fair districts, is who they put in. They put in Renfield, who is a creature of the Bronx Democratic machine. Why? You couldn't pick out a judge from upstate to sit on the Court of Appeals to fill that vacancy if you had somebody who accused themselves? Why did you go directly into the heart of the beast, the Bronx political machine, where the Speaker of the Assembly is the person who made her political career? That is Judge Renfield. And I hope to God Judge Renfield is a decent person, a fine judge, and does the right thing and rules on the facts and the law and upholds the Constitution, which says once the redistricting is done, it lasts for the full 10 years of the redistricting and not violate.
Absolutely.
That. So I've gotten the sign. We have to sign off. Once again, Jesse, I think a very interesting, compelling show. I want to thank you very, very much for your contributions. I look forward to being with you again next week on Let the Record Show. Thanks again, Jesse.
Thank you.
If you're having problems with your septic system and you're tired of spending so much money each year to have it pumped, then SeptiClean is the answer for you. SeptiClean is an advanced specially formulated blend of bacteria used in the treatment of home and commercial septic systems. The breakdown of waste in your system relies on biological activity of naturally occurring bacteria. SeptiClean restores the natural biological process in your septic system and boosts the existing biological activity. SeptiClean is completely safe on all plumbing and can help prevent expensive emergencies in pumping. SeptiClean has approximately 6 to 100 times the bacteria count of other leading off-the-shelf brands in a 1-year supply. SeptiClean comes in a water-soluble pack, which you flush down the toilet once a month with no mess or stress. Save time, money, and maintenance on your septic system. Find SeptiClean at Emporium True Value Hardware on Main Street in Sag Harbor or visit micro-tab.com. That's micro-tabb.com. Micro-tabb.com.